I really strongly want people to conceptualize digital media as a drug. It's a potent tool, but it's also a powerful drug. When we're using it as a tool, it's great. When we're using it as a drug, too much is not a good thing.
Welcome back. I have never been as excited as I am today to share a conversation with you. We are here with the amazing Dr. Anna Lembke. She is a powerhouse when it comes to understanding why we're hooked on our screens, our habits, and even our thoughts. She's a psychiatrist at Stanford. She's an addiction expert, and she's the author of the wildly popular New York Times bestselling book, Dopamine Nation. Anna is going to break down the science of dopamine in a way that just clicks. And trust me, when you hear her explain it, you're never going to look at your cravings the same way again. You're never going to wonder, what is wrong with me that I feel a little apathetic? What's wrong with me that I don't feel motivated? What is wrong with me that I just don't feel joy in my life? You're going to get the answer in this show. And the problem is pervasive, but once we have information, we can take the power back. We can change things for the better. So in this episode, we're going to unpack the wild ways that dopamine really controls our attention span. It fuels social media addiction, and it keeps us stuck in unhealthy loops. But like I said, once you learn this one key truth about how dopamine actually works in your brain, everything can change. This might just be the most important conversation you're ever going to hear about breaking free and taking back control of your mind. We know that we change through the transformation of our minds. This conversation, I think, is a key component of it. Okay, without further ado, here is the amazing Dr. Anna Lembke. Dr. Lembke, what is one activity that secretly rewires our brain for addiction without us even realizing it?
Oh my gosh, great question. There are so many in the modern world that are potentially addictive, given that they've been made more potent, more accessible, more novel, more bountiful. But I think the one that's probably most ubiquitous, pervasive, and happens with the least amount of our own awareness is just our digital devices, our phones, right? These kind of can't live without communication, map, social connection, information, gratification, all of it is in this little portable device that's on our bodies 24/7. People fall asleep with their devices commonly at night. It's the first thing they touch in the morning. And there's no doubt, in my mind anyway, that this is changing our brains.
I've been building an app for the past year. It's a self-care app with guided journals and breath work and stress relievers in it. And I remember talking to a couple of counselors who were also consulting on the app. And I said, I want to make this as fun and as helpful to people as I can, but how do I make sure I make this without taking advantage of what every app does, which tries to hook people and keep people there forever? And so on a couple of different things, like we have a button where you can spin a wheel and it gives you an activity you can do in under 10 minutes to make you feel better, calling a friend, taking a walk, things like that. But you only get 7 spins a day because we want this app to say, hey, take 10 minutes off social media, invest in yourself with the app, with Uplift, but you only need to use it so much. And then you've got to get back to your regular life. And I've heard you talk about on other interviews how we're investing so much on our online life that our offline life seems really hard and sometimes, not your words, but my words, a little disappointing. Can you talk about that phenomenon?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first of all, let me just say about your proposed app, without knowing too many more details, the simple fact that the wheel spin leads to an activity that is not using, the computer. I mean, that's to me really key, is you're essentially prompting people to put the phones down, to, close down the screens and to go out and interact with other people, interact with the environment, with nature. One thing that's very clear is that wherever we are investing our time, money, and energy, we are essentially cathecting. And cathecting is this really old psychoanalytic term that means we're essentially making it a part of ourselves. We're making it beloved to ourselves. And that's exactly what we're doing with the internet, with the virtual space with our devices, we're tending to them in the ways that we really need to be tending to the real people in our real life, to the physical plant that we live in, our homes, our gardens, our places of work, the kinds of hobbies and activities that we value, in addition to the things that we value about the internet and the digital medium, which, many good things there too. But it's the problem of spending all of our time there and not spending any of our time away from the digital medium, that then eventually leaches our in real life experience of anything salient or interesting or worth hanging around for. And of course, it's not just an individual problem, also a collective problem, because if we get off of our devices and go outside and nobody else is out there because they're all inside on their devices, that's an added challenge, isn't it? So I think doing this together, not just as individuals, but also as collective humans who are tribal and social and need each other, is going to be really key.
This is exactly why I'm so excited to have you on the show. You're one of the world's leading experts on addiction. You're a best-selling author. You're a professor of psychiatry at Stanford. And what you do so well is you help people understand the science of why we get hooked and how to break free. So given that, could you explain dopamine to us like we're 10 years old?
Okay, sure. That's about my level too, so it's all good. So dopamine is a chemical that we make in our brains, among many other chemicals. It's what we call a neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitters are the chemicals that modulate our electrical circuits. And through a kind of a symphony of chemical modulators and neurons all working in concert in a very complex way, that makes that's our brain. Every single moment of time constantly changing to allow us to respond to both internal, bodily, and external stimuli in order to have the kind of appropriate responses that we need to stay alive and to thrive. So dopamine is one of many modulators, and it's essential for the experience of pleasure, reward, and motivation. So it's not the only neurotransmitter by any means involved in that process. But it has become a kind of a common currency for neuroscientists to measure how addiction works, how pleasure and reward works, and also what goes wrong when we become, what goes wrong in the brain with dopamine. And essentially, anything that we do that's pleasurable or reinforcing or even just new that our brain registers as important for survival, something that we need to approach and explore, that releases dopamine in a dedicated reward pathway of the brain called the reward circuitry. The more dopamine that's released and the faster that it's released, the more likely that substance or behavior is to be pleasurable, reinforcing, and potentially addictive.
Okay, this is fascinating. So I think when we hear the word addiction, we think about alcohol or drugs, but you define something being addictive a little differently. How do you define it?
Well, actually, my definition is consistent with the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders and all the leading organizations. It's just that this is information that I think maybe the average layperson doesn't have. Why should they? But the definition of addiction broadly is the continued compulsive use of a substance or a behavior despite harm to self and or others. And often we summarize that as the 4 C's: control, cravings, compulsions, and consequences.
So really, when we think of addiction, instead of only thinking about kind of the harder substances, quote unquote, we can think about video games, shopping, scrolling TikTok. I mean, there's so many things that we do that makes us feel good in the moment that when we're done, we feel worse than when we started. And we're wondering, well, why am I so tired? Why do I not feel engaged by life? Because we're losing ourselves in addictive behaviors. But unfortunately, modern life is kind of developed, especially with internet use, in a way to keep us addicted to constant dopamine hits, right?
Right, exactly. So we're dealing now with a mental health crisis, rising rates of anxiety, depression, and even suicide in some countries all over the world. And the rates are going up fastest in the wealthiest nations. I think the answer is that we're overstimulating our brains with too much dopamine reward. and that our brains are having to compensate by downregulating dopamine transmission to this dopamine deficit state, which again simulates all kinds of psychiatric illnesses from major depressive disorder to generalized anxiety disorder to psychotic disorders. So, yeah. And we can get addicted to these behaviors, especially because they've been drugified. That is to say that, we're wired to connect with other human beings, right? And the way that our brain gets us to make those connections is by releasing dopamine when we make an intimate connection, by releasing oxytocin, our love hormone, which actually binds to dopamine releasing neurons in the reward pathway and releases more dopamine. That's how our brains get us to do the things that we need to do to survive. But what's happened today is that things like digital media, social media in particular, have taken human connection and distilled it down to its most rewarding essential components without any of the upfront work required to get that kind of connection, right? So now we can just sit on the couch. We don't have to go out. We don't have to meet people. We don't have to make an effort to make conversation. If they're kind of boring or whatever, it's dull for a while, we have to sort of tolerate the boredom. If there's a conflict of interest or opinion, well, we have to deal with the frustration of that. None of that's true with social media, right? We can sit on the couch, we can swipe right or swipe left. If the person's boring or whatever, they say something we don't like, we can go find another person. And of course, it's all made much more potent because now we have this immediate feedback loop at scale.
Which makes sense when you look culturally at what's happening with huge levels of apathy in society and depression. Can you speak to just what you've seen and what research points to in terms of why everyone's so apathetic and bummed out?
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of explanations. People have talked about sociopolitical climate, the income disparity, multi-generational traumas, and all of that is part of it for any given individual who has had those experiences. Mm-hmm. But I really think that the level at which we're seeing kind of this ennui and despair cannot be explained by these older narratives. I think we really have to begin to rethink what's actually going on here. And I would say what's going on is that we are constantly bombarding our brains with these easy comforts that are incredibly convenient. And we've essentially insulated ourselves from pain. It's really hard now to actually find something to do that's effortful and meaningful and requires, us to sweat, to get there. Of course, this is going to be different for different people, but in general, in wealthy nations, we are more insulated from pain. We've got machines to do our work. We've got more leisure time, more disposable income than ever before in human history. Even the poorest of the poor have more access to luxury goods than at any point in humanity. And you would think, again, that all of this would be exactly what we aimed for and we would be so happy. But, there's a mismatch between our ancient wiring and our modern ecosystem such that we're not happy because we're not wired for this. We're wired to be strivers, never happy with what we have, always looking for more. So I think the answer is actually to literally eschew or greatly moderate or limit highly pleasurable activities and intentionally and purposefully seek out painful or difficult activities because, again, that will get our reward pathway in a much more balanced place.
Yeah, anything to save us from just feeling, I'm not passionate about anything. Nothing excites me. It's a terrible feeling to have. Before I found your work, after work, at the end of the day, I would treat myself to quality scrolling time on the couch. In 2020, I had so much quality scrolling time with the stress of lockdown, I may have hurt my right thumb because I was scrolling so much. But before I found your work, in my mind, that was quality downtime. But after I found your work, I realized I need to go for a walk. Mm-hmm. And so I won't want to go for a walk. It will be painful. Sometimes it's cold. Sometimes it's too hot. The first 10 or 15 minutes, I'll hate it, but I'll feel good all night.
Yeah.
One way that I've tried to build in my life 2 or 3 times a week when I shower, at the end of shower, I put it on cold. And I didn't understand at first what was going on, but I knew for hours I felt great.
Oh,
which is the wildest thing.
Yeah.
Who would have imagined?
Yeah, and this is a whole branch of science called hormesis, and hormesis is this Greek term which means to set in motion. And it's essentially a growing literature showing that if you expose an organism, a fruit fly or a rodent or a human, to mild to moderate doses of toxic or painful stimuli, what the body does is it senses injury and in response starts to upregulate production of feel-good neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, our endogenous cannabinoids, our endogenous opioid system. So, as I said before, it's a great way to get our dopamine indirectly by paying for it up front through this opponent process mechanism, a kind of compensatory healing mechanism. Whereas if we just sit down and scroll to the point where our thumbs hurt, we've got a brain that's now trying to compensate for too much passive, unearned dopamine. And it will do that by involuting like postsynaptic dopamine receptors, bringing dopamine down to below normal levels. And again, that feels like apathy. That feels like lassitude. That feels like depression, anxiety, insomnia, despair, boredom. Mm. So the thing that we need to constantly remind ourselves of is that, the right kind of pain is actually really good for us. Not too much, not too little, but there are forms of hormesis or intentionally seeking out painful or challenging activities that are the right dose, are the right kind, are sustainable. And again, because we live in an environment that's so convenient, so comfortable, so kind of geared toward just making us just not have to do anything to get anything we need to survive, it's very easy to lapse into this state where our brains are just sort of confused. Like, wait, what are we doing? Like, what happened to having to go out and find food, clothing, shelter, find a mate, get warm, make sure I don't die. So we have to simulate that by intentionally incorporating inconvenience, hardship, sort of a simulated hardship into our lives.
Do you have some best practices or tips for how to manage our lives so we're not getting too much cheap dopamine, if that's the right word to use for it, and we're building in natural ways?
I have so many tips. I have so many
Great.
tips. Yeah. So first of all, I really strongly want people to conceptualize digital media as a drug. It's a potent tool, but it's also a powerful drug. When we're using it as a tool, it's great. When we're using it as a drug, too much is not a good thing. A little bit, now and then, probably okay for most people, but too much, not good. So one of the ways to conceptualize when we're using digital media as a drug is when we're using it to entertain ourselves or change the way we feel. So trying to be very alert to that, and maybe even writing it down, like how many times a day did I use this to change the way I feel or to entertain myself? And maybe there's an alternative, slower form of entertainment. Maybe I can get my news from a newspaper, or longer form journalism. Maybe I can be entertained by a book. Now, in my case, a book has its own dangers, as I talk about in my book. I got addicted to romance novels, got a Kindle, became a chain reader. Anyway, that's another saga. But in terms of tips, I'm also just kind of creating tech-free spaces and using what I call self-binding. So these are both literal and metacognitive barriers between ourselves and whatever our drug of choice is, whether it's food or YouTube videos or potato chips or alcohol, or putting some space between ourselves and our drug of choice. So I really recommend not using your phone as your alarm clock, getting a regular alarm clock or just letting yourself sleep till you wake naturally if you can, getting out of bed within about 5 minutes of waking, and not touching any device until you've done a list of healthy activities. Maybe it's exercising, maybe it's meditating, maybe it's praying, making your bed, eating a healthy breakfast, cleaning up, brushing your teeth, all of those things. And only then, after all of that, what one of my patients called the whole jamboree, kind of a healthy morning routine, because I really think starting off the day is key. Then going on your device, but making a list of what you're going to do on your device, because once we open it up, it's really easy to sort of forget that. So actually writing down, I'm going to check my email. I'm going to text some friends. I'm going to go through my Instagram for no more than half an hour and, see what people have sent. But just writing it down and trying to commit to that, and then getting off, and going and actually literally doing something else. And at the end of the day, the same thing. Now, at the end of the day, we have less willpower than we do at any other point in the day, right? Because it runs out. It's not, an infinite resource. So if there's anything that we know once we start, it's difficult to stop, that should be something that we're not doing at the end of the day, right? Which is really hard because most of us leave our drink or our smoking or our dessert or our Netflix watching or whatever. We leave it for the end of the day as a kind of a reward. And yet that's exactly the wrong time. So if you want to do that kind of reward, try to do it earlier in the day, but not when we're tired, and instead save for the evening and a relaxing activity that brings us joy, that doesn't involve something that requires us to exercise too much willpower.
So, what's going on in our brains when we feel out of control and we can't stop doing something like checking our phones or eating, a pint of ice cream? What is happening when we know we don't want to?
Right. Well, I mean, what's happening is that we're in a dopamine deficit state, and our brains are telling us you need to get back to baseline levels. That's what neuroscientists call homeostasis. And the fastest way to get back to baseline levels is to use more of whatever our drug is, because temporarily that does bring us back up to baseline. The problem is that the brain iteratively responds to that by further downregulating dopamine transmission. So, it's that drive toward homeostasis, wanting to bring those dopamine levels back up, that gets us back there. Also, stress can be a huge trigger. And anytime we deviate from homeostasis by doing something that releases a lot of dopamine all at once, that also stimulates our cortisol response. So now we're in a stress response. And of course, the reflexive response to a stress response is to use more of our drug to try to feel better so we can really get in this vicious cycle.
So, it is true that when we're on social media or on the internet and we see something that upsets us, it does cause a cortisol spike, which also we have a dopamine spike. So we're upset, we're stressed, our body's out of whack, and then soon we're going to have a negative amount of dopamine because our body's trying to regulate us. And then it's just, we're going to start over again, another pint of ice cream or get back on the phone because we're desperate to feel okay.
Well, what we do know about digital media and social media is that it does light up the same reward pathway as drugs and alcohol. So we can infer from that it is releasing dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. There are studies showing that people who are addicted to social media show similar brain changes as people who are addicted to things like internet gaming or other types of addictions. There is at least one study showing that people with social media addiction actually have downregulation of their postsynaptic dopamine receptors, which suggests that they too are going into this dopamine deficit state that we see with people who get addicted to things like heroin, alcohol, methamphetamines.
As a psychiatrist, do you feel like we are systematically destroying our attention span because of short form content?
Yeah, there's definitely evidence. People have studied this, showing that people who are online a lot have a shorter attention span. It's also true that people who have attention deficit disorder are at higher risk for addiction. So you've got the sort of a double whammy. People who have difficulty with sustained attention, who spend a lot of time online, are going to be even at higher risk for addiction to social media, which then further erodes their attention span. So, which I think highlights an important thing, that not everybody is equally vulnerable to the problem of addiction, just in general. And then, of course, there's a whole drug of choice concept. So what may be reinforcing for one person, online pornography, may not be reinforcing for another person. Maybe for them, it's online shopping. Or for one person, it's opioids. For another person, it's cannabis. So we're all wired a little bit differently. But in general, things that are intoxicating for many people tend to be things that release a lot of dopamine all at once in the reward pathway.
That makes perfect sense. Do you have any tips for how we can improve our attention spans? Because we're all fighting against this in some way or another at this point.
What I would really emphasize people to do is to, again, try not to have the digital medium be sort of in dribs and drabs through their entire day, but instead consolidate the time that you're going to be on the medium. Don't be like running for the bus or in your car, which isn't safe anyway, right? Like actually schedule a time. Okay, I'm going to go on this time and I'm going to, respond to my social media if that's what I need to do, or I'm going to go on, I'm going to do my email, or but other than that, try to not just be mindlessly scrolling on the medium, actually shut it down, even power it off. So I find that when our phones are actually turned off, they have less pull for us
Hmm.
than if they're transmitting and receiving, and especially if you ding them on notifications. Of course, you can try to turn notifications off, you can go grayscale, but I really think the key is to power it off, actually turn it off for a period of time and put it away, and even physically separate from the digital media, whether it's the laptop or the phone. Go outside, go somewhere without your phone. It's really scary to do that. We're so used to having these devices with us. We almost can't, feel like we can't function without them, but we really can. And it really does help sustain attention. There's a huge, huge problem now with procrastination.
Hmm.
I mean, there was always problems with procrastination, but many more people struggle with procrastination than ever before because there are so many ways to procrastinate on these devices, and the devices invite procrastination by leading us down these rabbit holes. So I think, doing things through a slower medium. If you have to get somewhere, like get out an old fashioned map, just like as an alternative, and map it out, and try to get there maybe without using your GPS, or ride your bike or walk instead of driving. Just try to like slow it down, get into a quieter space, do everything a little bit more slowly and a little less conveniently. And it changes the experience.
Well, and I think about the research that shows your happiness quotient in life when measured, by the long-term Harvard study is the quality of your relationships.
Yes.
And if that determines how happy we are in life and what a good life is, what are we doing ignoring other humans and living online, just making ourselves feel more apathetic and depressed every day?
I know. I couldn't agree with you more. That was so well said. And social media can really create the illusion of human connection, right? Where like we have our social media influencers that we like and we follow, and or our shows or whatever there are, and like in moderation probably is okay. The problem is that it turns into 2, 3, 4 hours a day, and now we're looking at a life that's where we spent the vast majority of our leisure time, or maybe even more than our leisure time, our work time too, on this medium where we're not really interacting with people that will be there for us when we're sick, and when we're desperate, and when we really need a friend.
That's such a great point. My team was also thrilled that I had the chance to speak with you. So they have sent in a couple of questions. I want to read a
Great.
couple of those. She said, "Yeah, I want more focused work time. What's a good way to prime myself to be more focused? Should I incorporate something enjoyable like a piece of chocolate or avoid it till I'm done?"
Okay. Yeah, great question. So, I mean, if you really want more focused work time, I think what it requires is signing up for suffering.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is that when we sit down and really have to create something or focus something, it is hard brain work. And we're not really used to doing hard things, or we're used to doing hard things in really small increments and then like interrupting ourselves and going checking our phone or checking
Yeah.
our email. So the key to really being more productive and more focused work time is when you get to that moment, which can happen within seconds of starting whatever the task is, where you want to check your phone or check your email or look at a video, just stop. Just stop. Don't check any of those things. Hopefully they're preferentially far away. Hopefully you've actually maybe even disconnected from the internet for a while, so it's not easy to get to. That's those barriers or self-binding strategies. And just acknowledge that it's happened and you want to do something else, and how painful it is to not do that something else and to actually continue. So it's sort of like a mental speed bump, which when we hit those now, there's so many ways we can just stop and do something else. Instead, stop, pause, don't do those other things, and then go over the speed bump and keep going. It's like a mental game, but it's incorporating the awareness of the ways in which we're constantly interrupting ourselves, and then being aware of it, but then not letting it actually derail us, and just taking and realizing it's really hard. I mean, it's called work for a reason.
Yeah.
And then in terms of like the chocolate reward, I actually we do that a lot. We kind of bookend or organize our days around our rewards. It's like, okay, I'm going to work, then I'm going to reward myself. But actually, I don't recommend that either, even though it's natural to want to do that. Because when we are always thinking about the reward at the end of the work, then we're really, in a way, not able to enjoy the work because the work is just something we have to move through until we get the reward. Whereas if we eliminate the expectation of the reward at the end, then believe it or not, we reorient on the work and it becomes enjoyable because it's what we're doing right now. So what we want to do is get into a flow state where the work itself is the reward. An important piece of that means we're not overworking. So we're not overextending ourselves, staying up really late into the night, or doing more work than our bodies and brains can really handle.
That is great advice. Okay, so no chocolate at the end.
That's right.
The next question is, what's the ideal balance between discipline and reward when trying to build better habits?
Well, I think you don't want to go to the extreme on either one, right? You don't want to go to the extreme of reward. You don't want to go to the extreme of pain either. Like I said, you don't want to, on the work side of things, you don't want to do more than what your body naturally and comfortably. I mean, everybody can push the limits and everybody's going to be in a different place, right? So for one person, maybe just getting up off the couch and going outside is really tough. And for someone else, maybe they have to, 100-mile race is like pushing their limits. So we're all in different places and we get there gradually through repetition. And I also think, although I talk about this pleasure pain balance and I talk about not going too far in the pleasure, not going too far in pain, sort of finding that middle ground, it's also true that, we are natural strivers. We're not just going to sit around in the middle. We're going to want to have these experiences. But I think the key is, even those experiences of pleasure, pain, reward, discipline, if they're happening in healthy rhythm with nature and with other people, we usually can find the natural stopping point. It's when we get on these kind of digital media, there's like no natural stopping point, and these things are engineered to be addictive. So it's very hard to have a kind of to find a healthy balance with something that's an intoxicant, which is why I generally recommend avoiding intoxicants except in extreme moderation, special occasions, and even then, making sure you have some kind of safety net in place so that you don't go overboard.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the thing about being an expert, maybe one of the, I'll say the top expert in the world on dopamine, it would be very hard for you to say, here's one thing about dopamine everyone needs to know. I wish every single human knew this. But if someone obnoxiously asked you the question, how would you respond?
Well, first of all, I really wouldn't say I'm the top expert on dopamine. I am somebody who's been able to, as a health educator and a psychiatrist, kind of translate it for the average person. But really, I'm relying on the amazing work of my neuroscience colleagues who are the experts on dopamine. I think what's been, most informative for me in my own life and in my work with patients with severe addiction is this concept of homeostasis, that we're always releasing dopamine at a baseline tonic level and that our brains want to return to that, such that with any deflection, increasing in dopamine or decreasing in dopamine, we want to get back to that baseline. And that is really essential to understand about dopamine, because what it means is that anything that gives us that increase in dopamine firing, that pleasure, will, with enough repetition, actually get weaker and shorter in duration. But that after response to pain or that below normal threshold of dopamine will get stronger and longer, and that we can actually get to a point where we change our hedonic or our joy set point, where now we're needing that reward not to feel good, but just to feel normal. And when we're not using, we're dysphoric, we're angry, irritable, craving. That I think is really important, that addiction and compulsive overconsumption more broadly is kind of driven by this dysphoric experience, even though initially it feels euphoric. With time, we don't even notice how we're becoming chronically dysphoric and now having to use that reward just to get back up to our original normal baseline. We have lots of patients who come in not necessarily looking for help with addiction. They're looking for help with depression, anxiety, insomnia, and attention. And when we discover they're using digital media or substances, drugs and alcohol in heavily or repeatedly or in obviously addictive ways. Sometimes, the first and best intervention is to just have them abstain from their drug of choice for 30 days, a dopamine fast, knowing they'll feel worse before they'll feel better because they'll be in withdrawal. But them then discovering that after 30 days, they're no longer depressed. They're no longer anxious. It's really tricky because initially it feels like it makes them feel better, but in the long run, it actually makes them feel worse.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think if everyone understood that, we would get out of the cycle of easy dopamine and then feeling terrible and wondering why we don't have any passion for life and we don't feel joy.
Yeah, I wish that just understanding it were enough. Unfortunately, we're such slaves to our ecosystem that living in a world that's constantly titillating us and inviting us to consume makes it very difficult not to consume, even if intellectually and conceptually we know that it's not good for us. So we really have to, collectively change the ecosystem such that, we have a system that actually helps us be healthy, as opposed to the world that we live in now, which is really conspiring against our health.
Exactly. I mean, one of the maxims I live by is that I need to not rely on discipline, but rely on my environment to help me succeed.
Yeah,
Because
so great.
otherwise, what am I going to do? Just exhaust
Yeah,
myself all the time?
right. And a lot of people don't understand that because we've really located mental illness or even, neurotic behaviors of all kinds in our brains, but it's in the world. It's in the
Yeah.
world. We are creatures of the world that we live in.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, a couple fun questions at the end. I know you have a
Okay.
class to get to very soon.
Yes.
Do you have a movie or a book that you've been recommending to other people recently?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm a big reader, so lots and lots of books. Ones that I keep going back to, kind of cliched, but Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, I love. And there's also a wonderful series of books by a psychiatrist who's also a Buddhist, Mark Epstein. The one I really recommend to start with is Going to Pieces Without Falling Apart. It's a really wonderful book that helped me in a very hard time of my life. So those are two I tend to recommend. And then what was the other one? Movies?
A movie, yeah. Do you have a movie that you love?
Yeah, one of my absolute favorite movies is Galaxy Quest. I don't know if
I
you've
have
ever seen
seen
it.
it.
Okay,
It's one of my husband's favorite movies. I've
there you
probably
go.
seen it 15 times.
Oh, there you go. He has a good sense of humor. And I also really like This Is Spinal Tap. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yep,
It's a
so good.
mockumentary. Anyway, those are two of my favorites.
That's great. And then any projects that you're working on that are exciting to you right now?
Oh gosh, I have so much going on related to our addiction medicine fellowship and different projects I'm involved in related to social media and digital addictions and things.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you for all of your work and thank you for joining us. I've learned so much. I know everyone listening's learned so much. So thank you for joining in. We really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm so grateful that Dr. Lembke took time away from teaching at Stanford and all of her research and just the amazing work she does to talk to us about this because, like I said before, it is our responsibility to transform our minds, right? It is our responsibility to find out what's going on in the modern world that we live in. I think that God did design our brains in a certain way where we put in a certain level of work, a little bit of pain, whatever that is. We feel good, we get rewards. And all of a sudden now, really the last 10 years, definitely the last 20 years, but the last 10 years, the last 5 years, and it's just accelerating rapidly. Everything is so quick. Everything is so easy. It's not how he designed our brains. So, of course, we're overstimulated, and the natural chemicals that he put in our body to manage how we feel and emotions, of course, they're out of whack because we live in this constant flow of overstimulation, which, as she explained, drops our dopamine down. And you'll remember Nicole Vignola was on the show before, and she explained how when your dopamine drops after a dopamine peak, there's a refractory period where you can't raise it. So say you wake up in the morning and you scroll for 10 minutes, it's a huge hit of cheap dopamine. Then you're going to bottom out. You'll feel your dopamine will be lower than it was when you first started, and you can't get another dopamine hit for a while. So you really just put yourself behind the 8 ball before your day even starts. And like Dr. Lembke said, it's not just us, it's the environment we live in. But once we understand this, we can take the power back and we can change at least our little environment. And if more of us educate ourselves and more of us know what's going on, we can't change the world, but we can change ourselves. And a lot of us doing that is going to make a real difference. So thank you for listening. I hope you love this as much as I did. I am so grateful that we get to spend this time together every week. Thank you for investing in you. Thank you for investing in the renewal of your mind and the health of your emotions and the health of your body, because this is not about you. This is about your family, your relationships, your community. Like Dr. Lemke and I were talking about, we spend so much time doing something that drains us of joy when the real sense of joy that science has proven over time is our relationships, our relationship with the Lord, our relationship with other people. We got to balance it out. That's how we live our best lives. That's how we live life of abundance. And I believe in the gifts that God has for you. I believe in your dreams, and I know you're making a difference in this world in ways that only you can. You're here watching or listening to this show because you're that kind of woman. There's fluff out there. There's all sorts of fluff that you could be listening to or watching on YouTube, but you're not. You're learning new things. You're investing in you. And that's wonderful for you, but it's even better for all of the people that your life affects. So let me remind you that you're stronger than you think, you're smarter than you give yourself credit for, and you're braver than you feel in the hard moments. And the best part of this is you're just getting started. You are capable of incredible things because the Spirit of God lives in you. The dreams in your heart aren't there by accident. God placed them there, and He's giving you everything you need to live them out. It's my joy to coach you, to cheer you on, and remind you that with God, you have what it takes. So keep stepping up, keep showing up and loving well, because you know the truth. You cannot break a woman who gets her strength from God. I hope you have a great day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Sorry, I don't have my thing. Ignore me. Let me turn this on.